Silence is often mistaken for defeat. In a world that rewards noise, speed, and constant reaction, staying quiet can look like surrender, but silence is not losing. Sometimes, it is the strongest position a person can take. The moment everything went wrong, he said nothing. The accusations came fast, louder than truth, sharper than facts. Voices stacked on top of each other, each one demanding an answer, an apology, a reaction. They wanted him to fight back. They wanted him to break. They wanted proof that the pressure was working. He stayed silent. Not because he was weak. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he understood something they didn't. Not every battle is won with words. Silence creates space, and space reveals intention. While others shouted, he listened. While they rushed to label him, he watched their behavior expose them. Every interruption, every exaggeration, every insult said more about them than any defense ever could. Silence held up a mirror, and they didn't like what they saw. People assume silence means agreement. It doesn't. They assume it means fear. It doesn't. They assume it means you've lost. Often, it means you've chosen not to waste energy on noise. Inside, he was steady. Thoughts lined up calmly, like soldiers waiting for the right moment, not charging blindly, not panicking. Silence gave him control. Control over timing, control over clarity, control over himself. There is a difference between being quiet and being powerless. The quiet person is observing patterns. The quiet person is collecting facts. The quiet person is protecting their strength. Noise feels powerful in the moment, but it burns fast. Silence lasts. Days passed. The shouting continued without him. Stories contradicted each other. Details fell apart. The louder they became, the clearer the truth appeared. Without his voice in the chaos, their words had nothing to push against and collapsed under their own weight. That's when he understood. Silence isn't empty. It's strategic. It forces others to reveal their hand. It removes you from emotional traps. It keeps your dignity intact while others spend theirs freely. When he finally spoke, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend every detail. He didn't attack back. He spoke once, clearly, calmly, and with facts that had been allowed to mature in silence. And suddenly, the room changed. The same people who demanded noise leaned forward. The same voices that mocked quietness now paused, because silence had done its work. It had filtered out emotion. It had sharpened truth. It had turned reaction into precision. Silence is not the absence of strength. It is strength under discipline. In moments of pressure, silence keeps you from saying the wrong thing. In moments of injustice, silence can buy time until truth stands on its own. In moments of provocation, silence denies others the satisfaction of control. This is why silence scares people. It can't be manipulated easily. The world is full of loud losers and quiet winners. Loud people mistake attention for power. Quiet people understand that power is measured by outcome, not volume. Silence is not quitting. It is choosing the right moment. Silence is not running away. It is standing still while others exhaust themselves. Silence is not losing. It is refusing to lose your composure, your focus, and your future. Not every victory is immediate. Some victories are invisible until the noise fades. And when it does, what remains is often the quiet one, still standing, still intact, still ahead. Because silence didn't weaken them. It protected them. Silence doesn't end when the noise stops. That's the part most people misunderstand. After the room emptied, after the voices faded, after the moment passed, silence stayed with him. Not as emptiness, but as armor. Because the hardest test of silence is not holding it in front of others. It's holding it when you're alone. At night, the mind tries to speak for everyone else. It replays sentences you didn't say. Arguments you could have won. Words that might have changed how people saw you. That's where most people break their silence, not publicly, but internally. He didn't. He let the thoughts pass without chasing them. He understood that reacting later, even in private, still gives the noise power. Silence had to be complete, external and internal. That's when it became strength. Silence teaches patience, and patience sharpens judgment. Instead of explaining himself, he invested his energy elsewhere, into rebuilding, into learning, into preparation. While others obsessed over being heard, he focused on being ready. Ready for the moment when silence would no longer be needed. Because silence is not permanent. It's purposeful. Every day, people mistook his calm for defeat. They moved on quickly, convinced they had won. That illusion made them careless. They stopped checking facts. They stopped watching their steps. They assumed the story was finished. It wasn't. Silence creates distance, and distance reveals truth. From that distance, he saw things clearly: who spoke out of fear, who spoke out of ego, who spoke to protect lies, and who spoke because they couldn't stand not being in control. Silence stripped away performance and left only motive. That knowledge was power. When people speak too much, they expose themselves. When they rush to explain, they often explain more than they mean to. Silence allows others to talk freely and reveal exactly who they are. He didn't interrupt that process. There's a moment in every conflict where silence becomes uncomfortable for everyone else. Questions start forming. Doubt creeps in. The absence of reaction forces reflection. That's when silence shifts from misunderstood to unsettling. And that's when it starts winning. Not loudly, not dramatically, but inevitably. When the time came to act, it wasn't emotional. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't driven by anger or pride. Silence had drained those impulses away. What remained was clarity. He chose his words carefully because he hadn't wasted them earlier. One statement, one decision, one move. That was enough. People often think strength looks like resistance, but real strength looks like restraint. Anyone can shout. Anyone can argue. Anyone can react. Very few can stay silent without shrinking inside. Silence requires confidence in truth. It requires believing that what's real doesn't need constant defense. It requires trusting that time, when paired with discipline, exposes what noise tries to hide. Silence also protects something precious: your identity. When you argue too much, you begin to shape yourself around others' accusations. You become reactive. You let them define the frame. Silence refuses that. Silence keeps your center intact. You remain who you were, unmoved, unbroken. And when people finally realize silence wasn't weakness, it's already too late. The balance has shifted. The outcome is set. The quiet one has moved forward while the loud ones are still explaining yesterday. Silence doesn't announce victory. It doesn't demand recognition. It doesn't seek validation. It simply works. And when the results appear, no explanation is needed. Because by then, the noise has nothing left to say. By the time people notice the shift, it had already happened. Silence doesn't warn. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't signal movement. That's why it's so often underestimated. While others kept talking about the past, he was already operating in the present. Quietly adjusting. Quietly aligning. Quietly stepping into positions no one thought he still had access to. Silence gave him freedom. Freedom to move without interference. People only watch those who make noise. And because he made none, he disappeared from their calculations. This is where silence becomes dangerous, not to the one holding it, but to those who assumed it meant surrender. They stopped preparing for him, stopped guarding against him, stopped considering his next move at all. That mistake was irreversible. Silence had given him something rare: invisibility with intent. From that place, he refined his direction. He didn't rush toward revenge or recognition. He aimed for alignment, actions that spoke without needing explanation. Every step was deliberate. Every move had weight because it wasn't diluted by constant commentary. When action finally came, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt inevitable. That's the paradox of silence. It looks like nothing while it's doing everything. People expect victory to be loud. They expect a final argument, a public reversal, a moment of triumph. But real turning points often arrive quietly, recognized only after the fact. By the time they realized he wasn't gone, the ground had already shifted beneath them. Silence had trained him to listen, not just to words, but to patterns, to timing, to what wasn't being said. That awareness sharpened his instincts. He no longer needed to explain himself because he understood the system he was moving through. Noise reacts, silence anticipates. There is power in not showing your hand, in not advertising your plans, in letting results arrive without warning. Silence preserves momentum because nothing leaks out prematurely. And perhaps most importantly, silence preserved his dignity. He never had to beg to be understood. Never had to chase validation. Never had to reduce himself to match the volume of others. Silence kept him whole while everything around him fractured. People often confuse dignity with pride. They're not the same. Pride needs applause. Dignity survives without witnesses. As outcomes began to surface, reactions followed. Confusion, then curiosity, then discomfort. How did this happen? When did this change? Why didn't we see it coming? Because silence doesn't announce growth. It hides it. And when growth finally becomes visible, it looks like luck to those who weren't paying attention. They don't see the discipline, the restraint, the nights of preparation, the patience it took to stay quiet while being misunderstood. But silence remembers. It remembers every moment you chose not to react. Every time you swallowed words that would have cost you more than they gave. Every instance where you trusted timing over impulse. Silence compounds. What starts as restraint becomes control. What becomes control turns into leverage. What turns into leverage reshapes outcomes. This is why silence isn't passive, it's active, intentional, and demanding. It requires more strength than noise ever will. And those who master it don't need to prove anything. By the time the truth stands fully visible, silence steps aside, not to take credit, but because its job is done, and what remains speaks louder than anything that was ever said. The final lesson of silence is this. It changes you before it changes anything else. By the time the outcome became clear, he was no longer the same person who had first chosen quiet. Silence had stripped away the need to be seen, the urge to be right, the hunger to be understood immediately. What remained was something steadier, self-trust. Silence forces you to sit with yourself. No audience, no defense, no performance. Just intention, and in that space, weak motives fall away, ego fades, impulse quiets. Only what truly matters stays. That internal shift is what makes silence powerful, because once you stop needing validation, you stop being controllable. People can provoke you only if you're still listening for their approval. Silence breaks that connection. It rewires where your confidence comes from. Not from reaction, but from alignment. He didn't win because others were wrong. He won because he was centered. When the dust settled, there was no celebration, no announcement. No, I told you so. Silence doesn't gloat. It doesn't seek closure from those who doubted it. It simply moves forward. And that forward movement is the real victory. Others were still processing the past, explaining it, rewriting it, arguing about it. He had already stepped into what came next. Silence had taught him to live ahead of the noise. That's the quiet advantage no one talks about. Silence shortens recovery time. It preserves energy. It keeps your vision intact when chaos tries to blur it. Loud people carry the weight of their words long after they've been spoken. Quiet people travel lighter, and when people finally understand that silence was never weakness, there's nothing left to prove. The proof is already visible, in stability, in progress, in peace. Silence doesn't mean you didn't care. It means you cared enough to protect what mattered. Silence isn't losing. It's finishing without damage. And in a world addicted to reaction, the one who can stay quiet walks away with something rare. Control of their future. What remains after silence has done its work is not revenge, not recognition, and not regret. It is clarity. Clarity about who you are when no one is listening. Clarity about what deserves your energy. Clarity about which battles were never yours to fight. Silence teaches discernment. It separates what feels urgent from what is actually important. When everything is loud, nothing is meaningful. When you choose silence, meaning returns. By now, no one questioned his quiet anymore. They adjusted to it. Some respected it, some feared it. Others tried to provoke it, hoping for one reaction, one slip, one crack. But silence had already reshaped his instincts. He no longer reacted automatically. He responded intentionally, or not at all. That's freedom. Silence doesn't make you invisible forever. It makes you untouchable while you prepare, and preparation changes outcomes more reliably than confrontation ever could. The strongest move is often the one no one sees coming. Looking back, he understood something most never realizes. Silence wasn't something he used. It was something he became. It wasn't a tactic anymore. It was a state. Calm under pressure, stillness in uncertainty, focus without distraction. From that place, decisions became simpler, not easier, but cleaner, less emotional residue, less wasted motion, less regret. Silence removed the need to win arguments. Results replaced explanations. And results speak without raising their voice. People often ask how he stayed calm, how he didn't break, how he resisted the urge to defend himself. The answer was simple, though not easy. He trusted time more than impulse. Time favors what is real. Noise favors what is urgent. Silence aligns you with what lasts. That's why silence doesn't rush. It waits until action matters. And when it moves with certainty. In the end, silence didn't make him smaller. It made him precise. It didn't erase his presence. It refined it. And when the chapter closed, there was no applause. Just forward motion. Just peace. Just progress that didn't need permission. Silence is not losing. It is choosing to win on your own terms, without noise, without damage, and without ever having to explain yourself. The very end. Silence leaves behind something most people never experience. Peace. Not the temporary peace that comes from winning an argument or proving someone wrong, but the deep, stable peace that comes from knowing you didn't abandon yourself under pressure. That was the real victory. Silence had removed the need to revisit the past. There were no lingering conversations in his head, no unfinished explanations, no words he wished he had taken back. Everything that needed to be protected had been protected. Everything that needed to fall apart had done so on its own. Silence had closed the door properly. People often believe closure comes from confrontation, from final talks, from dramatic endings. But silence teaches a harder truth. Real closure comes when you no longer need a response. He didn't need apologies. He didn't need acknowledgement. He didn't need understanding from people who never intended to give it. Silence freed him from that dependency. Once you stop waiting for others to validate your experience, you regain ownership of it. Silence returns your story to you. From that point on, his standards changed. He no longer felt obligated to explain every decision, no longer felt pulled into unnecessary conflict, no longer mistook attention for importance. Silence had recalibrated his sense of value. What he allowed into his life became more intentional. Fewer words, fewer promises, fewer distractions, more substance, more alignment, more forward motion. The quiet became selective, and that selectiveness became power. Not everyone deserved access to his thoughts. Not every situation deserved a response. Not every misunderstanding deserved correction. Silence taught him that boundaries don't always need announcements. Sometimes they work best when they're simply enforced through absence. As life moved on, people remembered the noise more than the outcome. They argued about what was said, who was right, who was louder. He remembered none of that. He remembered only the moment he chose restraint over reaction. That choice had changed everything. Silence had not delayed his progress, it had accelerated it. While others remained trapped in cycles of explanation and defense, he moved forward cleanly, without emotional debt. And perhaps the most important realization came last. Silence didn't make him cold, it made him clear. Clear about his direction. Clear about his values. Clear about what he would never sacrifice again, just to be heard. In a world that constantly demands a reaction, choosing silence is an act of self-respect. It says, I trust myself enough not to perform. Silence is not losing, it is choosing integrity over impulse, depth over noise, outcome over appearance. And once you understand that, silence stops feeling like restraint. It starts feeling like freedom. Silence doesn't end the story. It decides how the next one begins. After everything settled, after distance replaced emotion, one truth became undeniable. Silence had not only protected him, it had prepared him. Prepared him to move forward without carrying the weight of unnecessary battles. Most people drag old conflicts into new chapters. They carry resentment, explanations, and unfinished arguments like armor. He didn't. Silence allowed him to arrive lighter, clearer, unburdened. That's the hidden advantage. Silence teaches you how to let go without making a scene. He no longer felt the urge to revisit what happened. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer controlled him. Silence had broken the emotional attachment. The past stayed where it belonged, behind him. When new challenges appeared, he noticed the difference immediately. Pressure felt familiar, but not threatening. He had already learned how to stand still when chaos demanded movement. He had already learned how to think when others panicked. Silence had trained him for endurance. People who rely on noise burn out quickly. They need constant reaction, constant engagement, constant validation. Silence builds stamina. It allows you to last longer than conflict, longer than doubt, longer than attention. And lasting is often what decides everything. As time passed, people's memories blurred, opinions changed, narratives shifted. What once felt intense became irrelevant. Silence accelerated that process. Without reinforcement, drama fades. What doesn't fade is growth. The quiet work continued, unnoticed, uninterrupted, uncompromised. Each step forward was taken without explanation. Each improvement happened without announcement. Silence kept progress clean. By now, it was obvious. Silence had never been about hiding. It was about choosing substance over spectacle. In moments where words would have pulled him backward, silence pushed him forward. In situations where reaction would have cost him focus, silence preserved it. In places where noise would have diluted his intent, silence sharpened it. That's when the final understanding settled in. Silence is not an escape, it is a filter. It filters people, it filters motives, it filters distractions. What remains after silence is what was meant to stay. And when he looked ahead, there was no fear of being unheard. Because he no longer measured progress by attention, he measured it by alignment between who he was, what he did, and where he was going. Silence had aligned all three. So when the next chapter began, it didn't start with an announcement, it started with action. Quiet, deliberate, and undeniable, because silence doesn't need to speak. It already did its work. Eventually, silence stops being something you choose. It becomes something you carry. By now, he no longer counted how long he had stayed quiet, or wondered when he would speak again. Silence had settled into his posture, his decisions, his pace. It showed not an absence of words, but in the certainty behind every action. That certainty is rare. Silence had taught him how to move without friction. No constant explanations. No wasted debates. No emotional bargaining. Each step forward was clean because it wasn't tangled in old noise. This is what silence gives you in the long run: momentum without resistance. People around him noticed the shift. Conversations changed. Questions became fewer but more thoughtful. When he spoke, others listened, not because he demanded attention, but because silence had made his words scarce. Scarcity creates weight. Silence had recalibrated how others perceived him. Not mysterious, not distant, but grounded, reliable, unshakable. People trust those who don't speak carelessly. They sense discipline even if they can't explain it. That trust opened doors noise never could. Opportunities arrived quietly, invitations without persuasion, respect without performance. Silence had built a reputation that didn't need defending. And inside, something even more important had happened. He no longer feared being misunderstood. Silence had taught him that misunderstanding is temporary, but integrity lasts. That being right eventually matters more than being heard immediately. That truth doesn't rush to prove itself. So when misinterpretation appeared, he didn't rush to correct it. He focused on consistency. Over time, consistency spoke louder than correction ever could. Silence had given him patience with outcomes. He stopped measuring progress in days or reactions. He measured it in alignment and direction. As long as he was moving forward cleanly, nothing else mattered. That mindset changed everything. Silence wasn't about withholding emotion. It was about channeling it. Focus replaced frustration. Discipline replaced defense. Purpose replaced impulse. By now, the world around him was still loud, but it no longer reached him the same way. Noise bounced off instead of sinking in. Silence had built a boundary no argument could cross. And the final realization came gently, without drama. Silence had not taken his voice. It had refined it. When he chose to speak, it was no longer to convince. It was to create, to decide, to move things forward. Words became tools, not weapons. Silence is not losing. It is mastering when and why to speak. And once that mastery is yours, the noise never controls you again. Silence was never the absence of strength, it was its refinement. What began as restraint became clarity, and clarity became direction. In choosing silence, he protected his dignity, preserved his energy, and allowed truth to surface without force. While noise demanded attention, silence built alignment. While others argued, he advanced. Silence taught him that not every moment requires a response, and not every misunderstanding needs correction. Some things resolve themselves when given time. Some truths rise without being pushed. By the end, silence had given him something permanent: control over himself. No reaction owned him. No voice pulled him off course. He spoke only when words mattered, and when they did, they carried weight. Silence did not delay his progress, it purified it. And when the world finally understood, no explanation was needed. The results were visible. The path was clear. The future was intact. Silence was not losing. It was choosing a victory that left nothing broken behind.